Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Recover Your Life podcast. My name is Bridget, and on today's episode, I am talking to Wyndi Nelson all about understanding and befriending our bodies and what does it mean to live with compassionate curiosity towards the sensations and understanding our body in a deeper way. So, I am so excited for this conversation. Wyndi, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bridget. I am also very excited about this conversation. I love to geek out about stuff like this with other people who geek out with me.
Yes. So Wendy and I met several years ago in California at a preaching school, something we're both really passionate about in communicating in a way that honors God's hearts to other people. And I think as we've both been on our own journey, understanding somatic body work has been a part of that, of really connecting um, our being and our understanding of our bodies with what we believe about God, self, and others. And so I would love to just kind of even start there a little bit. How were you introduced to this idea that our bodies matter and that our bodies are not bad in your faith journey?
Oh, wow. Okay. It's been gradual,
Mm-hmm.
right? With things, I think the kindness of the Lord is
Mm-hmm.
part of that. And I am a slow to transition person,
Mm-hmm.
but I am naturally inclined to be curious
Mm-hmm.
about things and just curious about stories. I love people. I love people's stories. And so for my own story, I've been on a healing journey for
Mm-hmm.
decades, just kind of uncovering things in my own life. And I had gathered so much good stuff. I'd had a lot of good processing, lots of great experiences with therapists and coaches,
Mm-hmm.
but I just kept feeling stuck. And I met with a coach who she called at the time, she called it alignment
Okay.
coaching. And it felt like it all just clicked.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference was I integrated the wisdom of my body
Mm-hmm.
into what I knew to be spiritual truths
Yep.
and emotions. And it also helped me process emotion because I was really good at thinking emotions
Mm-hmm.
rather than feeling feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so it helped me recognize that feelings were stored in the body and processing that. So gently, I guess would be the answer,
Yeah.
slowly and gently.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So now you are a coach and you work with people. And one of the big things is, I think people may have even heard this term recently, is the idea of trauma informed coaching or trauma recovery coaching. Can we talk a little bit about how that is different than maybe just going to a behavioral therapy talk counseling session?
Absolutely. So, nothing against behavioral
Yeah.
talk therapy, narrative therapy. I'm actually enrolling in a narrative
Mm-hmm.
focused trauma recovery
That's
program.
great.
So, I absolutely
Mm-hmm.
believe in the narrative. But when we experience trauma, w- our higher level of thinking, like it goes offline. Our
Mm-hmm.
hippocampus, which stores memory, stores linear thought, to protect us.
Mhm,
Our body, our nervous system's job is to keep us alive
mhm,
in a way, if I'm oversimplifying, but it goes offline to protect us. And so we've probably all experienced things where we have details that come to us at different times, or we're not quite sure how it happened. We're not telling the story in a linear fashion, or somebody's telling us, you're a coach, somebody's
yeah,
telling you a story that's kind of hard to follow because it jumps
mhm,
all over the place. And that's because to protect us,
yep,
our higher levels of thinking have gone offline, but our body stores all of that information
mhm,
and in the form of sensation.
mhm,
So when I talk about the language of the body, that's texture, duration, intensity, pace. It's language around those words,
mhm,
and it's not logical. It
mhm,
just is. It's valid because it exists.
yep. That's so hard because
Yes.
I love rules and logic. I
Right.
want there
Me
to be
too.
an answer for everything. I want there to be a right and a wrong, and this is how you do it, and this is how you don't do it. And I want it to be a one and done thing where I process it one time and then it doesn't. And language that, my people are familiar with if they've worked with me is there just are some things that we have to process 4,000 times. And I
Hmm.
don't have answers of why sometimes our brains need 4,000 times and sometimes our brains needs 40 seconds.
Right.
But it's okay and it's changing. I think we have been so at war with our bodies for so long of if I was mature enough, if I was faithful enough, if I was educated enough or whatever the enough statement is for you,
Hmm.
that I wouldn't be responding this way anymore. Or we've been taught that maturity is some level of achievement where the things that used to be painful for me just aren't painful anymore.
Right.
And then we end up, we have no capacity to honor our stories because we feel like we have to deny what's really happening. Because if we were to acknowledge that there's still pain here, in a sense, it would be to acknowledge that we're not enough of whatever it is. So, can we talk about um, how do we, if we're brand new to this and we've never
Yeah.
even thought about, I've never really paid attention to my body before. Maybe I'm familiar with hearing God's voice or my conscience voice or whatever, but the fact that my body speaks to me and has a language, like, can we just have a little introduction to what is somatic body work and what is that language of our body?
Absolutely. And if we could back up just a little bit for
Mm-hmm.
me to say somatic connection, for
Mm-hmm.
me, it's a little bit more like somatic reconnection
Yes.
because we as humans are whole beings. We
Mm-hmm.
are body, soul, and spirit. And in a Christian context, your listeners
Mm-hmm.
will understand this. Soul is our mind, will, and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So we are all of it, and we're just reconnecting
Yep.
to the sensations in our body. They've always been there. We are created this way. We just, for one reason or another, have disconnected. And sometimes it's good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
We disconnect to stay safe.
Yeah.
But other times it's because, like you said, it's considered more mature to use logic and reason
Mm-hmm.
to process out my feelings or to process this traumatic event that
Mm-hmm.
happened and to disconnect from the feeling or the sensations in our body. Or even as believers or people with a spiritual context, we use spiritual truths and we kind of turn them into platitudes to suppress.
Yeah.
The thing about emotion in the body is it doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
Sensation, we can suppress sensation,
Mm-hmm.
we can ignore sensation, we can invalidate sensation, but it actually still exists.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm answering your question. I will get to the
That's great.
question, but it's long-winded. But
Yeah.
think about someone, you've probably heard this or you've witnessed someone tell someone else to stop crying,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, just stop crying.
Mm-hmm.
And the person sometimes cries harder,
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes it sounds a little bit like they're hyperventilating. I try, and they're trying so hard to stop crying, and then
Mm-hmm.
possibly the sensation stops, but it didn't actually go away.
Yeah.
What happened is they suppressed the
Mm-hmm.
sensation. So what somatic reconnection or connection or somatic care or somatic experiencing does is it gets us back in tune with our sensations, and that is within the body. It's
Mm-hmm.
housed within the body, and it's our body in relation to our external environment and
Mm-hmm.
our body in relation to our internal environment. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that is in a simple basic way, and I always tell people start simple.
Yeah.
Like, it's, you think it's way too simple, but this is like, think children.
Mm-hmm.
Children are naturally connected to their bodies. They jump up and down and jump off of furniture when they need to regulate because they're just in their bodies all the time.
Yep.
Children cry when they need to cry, they scream when they need to scream. So it
Mm-hmm.
is very primal, it is very simple.
Yeah.
Not simplistic, but it is simple.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just can connect to how do my legs feel? How do my feet feel on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
Is every part of my foot touching the ground? What does that feel like?
Yeah.
What's the temperature in the room? Is there a breeze? Do I feel something on my skin? Am
Mm-hmm.
I warm? Tuning in, standing outside nature is one of the best places
Yeah.
because nature, for whatever reason, helps us get out of our minds and into this space. We can hear the birds, we can feel the
Mm-hmm.
wind, we can feel the sun, we hear the wind, all of those things. So that's a simple way to connect externally. And
Mm-hmm.
then connecting internally just looks like noticing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what is my breath? What is my breath doing? What
Mm-hmm.
is my heart rate doing? We're not trying to shift. It's all about noticing,
Mm-hmm.
bringing awareness to those places. Do I have any tension? Those are probably the
Yeah.
simplest, most accessible, because there are other sensations in our body, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
those are the most accessible, the ones we're the most familiar with, the ones that we'll be able to build momentum with.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think for me, one of the things that's been really helpful, and I still feel a little strange about it because I wasn't taught that this was okay, has been like verbally expressing anger, and
Yeah.
like whether it's a ugh or a, like just like actually getting it out.
Yes.
And it's definitely put me in some awkward situations because I'm trying to verbalize, like, I don't like this. This is painful
Mhm.
for me. And I want to be able to get to a place where I can actually verbalize it. But even just expressing that, like, even in the, like, I find it a lot in the mornings. I've been trying to walk in the mornings because I feel like I have this like moving energy of I have to get up and move and do something.
Right.
That's been really regulating for me. But I found that, like, even before that, like, just giving my body permission to, like, make noises and say, and even if it's like a yay or a joy, it can be kind of whatever it is,
Yeah.
but just kind of connecting to that childhood sense of like, no, like I can share authentically what's happening for me. And that it is, I
Mhm.
mean, our hope is that we would be in community and in relationship with people that are safe to fully express with. That's our goal. But one of the things
Yeah.
I love about the healing journey of emotional health is when you invest in healing, like, it's for you. And so you're more connected to you. You understand more deeply what you like, what you don't like, even simple things of like, oh, I really don't like the way that I'm sitting right here. I don't like the way the sun's in my face. But we've just kind of been so desensitized. You talked about that
Mhm.
reprogramming or that reconnecting of, well, it doesn't really matter what's happening for you. You just have to put up with it. And
Right.
so reconnecting to that place of you have a choice. Which reminds me, one of the things that you talk about a lot, which I really appreciate, I mean, I really honor your voice in this space, is the idea of honoring autonomy and consent.
Yeah. Yes.
Those are big, important topics for you. Can you share a little bit about what does it mean to honor autonomy and consent in our lives?
Absolutely. And just I would just start by saying consent is not just for sex.
Correct.
I think in our society, we
Hmm.
have made consent this we've I mean, you've probably heard the expert fries, which
Hmm.
I can't remember what the acronym is that it stands for, but it's something about enthusiastic. And consent isn't always enthusiastic.
Yeah.
There's some holes. There's so much more nuance. But I
Hmm.
love that we're moving in this direction where we're talking about consent and
Hmm.
we're talking about bodily autonomy. And so
Hmm.
very simplistically, many of us disconnected from our own bodily autonomy as
Yep.
children, especially those of us, it doesn't matter. Many
Hmm.
of us disconnected.
Yep.
It's simple things like hug grandma goodbye
Hmm.
or give Aunt so and so a kiss or put your shoes on. You're going outside. You're going to need a coat. Wear a coat. Finish
Hmm.
your plate. Eat everything off of your plate. All of those things teach us to disconnect from what's actually happening inside of us rather than
Hmm.
trusting our own knowing, quote unquote,
Hmm.
our own wisdom of maybe I feel better without shoes
Hmm.
or I don't actually want to give kisses right now.
Hmm.
I'd rather give a high five or I can say bye. So the autonomy is listening to myself and it feels really selfish.
Hmm.
It feels really childish. It feels like what you said. I
Hmm.
love what you said. You just need to grunt with your anger, or you need
Yeah.
to like delight and make a funny, like, ha sound when you're
Yeah.
delighted and feel joy because it's all of it. It's all of our
Hmm.
senses. That's the simplest way to connect to our
Yeah.
bodily autonomy. But here's the other thing that I think people don't realize about connecting and
Hmm.
body autonomy and listening to ourselves. So the wisdom of the mind is logic
Hmm.
and reason.
Yeah.
There's typically there's a level of right or wrong. And I don't necessarily like using words like that, but there is a
Hmm.
level of tr- getting it wrong if I
Hmm.
use the wisdom of my mind.
Hmm.
I might think I looked at the weather app, I wasn't going to need galoshes and turns out
Yeah.
I need them. So I
Hmm.
can I can get that wrong. But with the body, the language of the body is simply is. And
Hmm.
so I can feel something. Like for example, I can walk into a room and just not feel safe
Hmm.
or and it doesn't have to make sense. I can be at I think we've talked about this. I can be in a church service.
Hmm.
Holy Spirit can be ministering to me, but I don't want anyone putting their hands on me.
Hmm.
You can pray for me from over there,
Yeah.
but please don't touch me. And
Hmm.
I don't have a logical reason. There's no quote unquote good reason.
Yeah.
I just and so that's trusting myself. I build trust with myself when I just
Mhm.
choose to respond to the
Mhm.
sensations that I'm feeling.
Mhm. I
Hopefully
love
that
that.
makes sense, but
Yeah, it does. I think for me, this reclaiming, because I even went through a season, like I said out loud, like I'm trying to surrender autonomy. I'm trying to get rid of it.
mm, oh, wow.
Because
Yeah.
if um I'm the problem here, and if I just figure out how to serve the needs of the other person, that like it'll fix the problem. Which caused a lot of damage for me, but
Yeah.
it also causes a lot of damage for the other people. I think that's been a huge um, understanding in adulthood has been, hey, like when I'm not communicating what's authentically happening for me, even if it results in pain for the other person, right? So if I
Yep.
say, hey, Wendy, um, I actually feel really hurt by the text message you sent me earlier, right? Now, I have been conditioned my whole life just not to say it and be like, oh, hey, good to see you, play it off. And I'll carry all of that in my body because I don't want you to feel that. I'm
Wow.
actually
Yeah.
lying to you and
Mhm.
I'm participating in the wounding of our relationship because I'm not being authentic with what's happening for me. And so that was I mean, there definitely was some shame in that, which I think is, again, okay. My listeners know here that emotions are not bad, that each and
Yeah.
every emotion, they have a purpose. And when we process them, they can lead us towards making healthier, safer decisions. And when we don't process them is when we end up having um, pain attached to those things. Um, and so I think there's this space of autonomy means that I have the right to say how, when, and with whom I'm engaging with the world around me. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Very,
And I
very succinct.
Mhm. And so, yeah, there's this like, oh, I no, I'm what's religiously expected of me, what's culturally expected of me. I have to perform like this. And taking that time, there is a grief process in it because now I'm showing up and now I'm saying no. And we talked about it because you and I have talked about it
Yeah.
privately. Is I went through a season where I actually started practicing spiritual autonomy. In a way
Yeah.
that showed up in my life was when people asked to pray for me when I was in a really deep season of pain, I said, no, thank you. And it wasn't because I don't believe that God listens to our
Right?
prayers. It's not because I don't believe these people love me. But the idea of being prayed for and kind of, again, with really well-intentioned, good-hearted people wanting to comfort me in pain, my body was experiencing that as a dismissal of pain. And so I had to learn to say, not right now. Or I'd love for you to pray for me, but I don't want you to pray for me right now, which has been so fascinating to me because I wonder how many of hundreds of people have had that experience of, you know, I used to really enjoy um, prayer or faith. Maybe even the concept of faith feels scary right now because your experiences within that community have been a really disembodied experience where for me to participate in the church culture meant that I had to deny what was really happening for me, and I really was feeling scared or I really was feeling shame or lonely or whatever it may be. And so starting to slowly kind of step back into that place. um, I love that you say that. Like, there is no like arrival where you get it right, and you're like, okay, now every time I process an emotion, I'm always in my body.
Right.
And we talk about that out of body experience, right? We're
Mhm.
familiar with that language of no, like my brain didn't know how to connect with what was happening for me, and so that realignment of coming back allows us to be fully present. And that's the childlike thing too, right?
Mhm.
Is the kids don't have a filter. And
Right.
so for us as grown-ups, it's learning to kind of go back and say, no, I have the right to exist here. So one of the questions I have for you that I would love for you to share with our listeners, if you feel comfortable, is in this idea of autonomy, of we have the right to choose how, when, and with whom we're going to engage. What does that look like for you personally to be on this journey of being a kind friend to your own body? Like, where do you find yourself saying no, where maybe before you felt conditioned of I have to say yes to this?
Oh, goodness. Yes. So I'm a parent. I'm
Mhm.
married, and I have 3 small boys.
Mhm.
They're 9 and 6, so they're still little.
Yeah.
Um, but I so a lot of times my conditioning
Mhm.
is this codependency with my children or this
Yeah.
codependency with my husband. And so it's choosing me. So there for me it's looked a little bit like what are my needs? And
Mhm.
so the way that I did this is what do I need? And needs are stored in the body, just like trauma.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of this it can feel like throwing spaghetti against the wall. I just want to say,
Mhm.
it's okay. I'm like, I need this, and then it turns out I don't actually need that. And needs change and ebb and flow. But I'll tell you some of my silly needs that
Yeah.
have remained consistent. And sometimes they're negotiable, and
Mhm.
sometimes they are just life, and you just have to do them.
Yep.
Again, I have small children, and a couple of years ago, I decided that I needed to not be the one that did bedtime every night.
Mhm.
And that felt really selfish because my kids preferred me, they wanted me, and
Mm.
it would sometimes result in their tears
Mhm.
and and bedtime would drag on a little bit longer because mom wasn't doing it. But it was something I needed permission to just be done sometimes.
Yeah.
And like my night has ended. Other things are I don't want to brush little children's teeth. I'm
Mhm.
just over the dependency thing. But
Mhm.
also that's just a life thing. So I still choose
Mhm.
to help and engage in the toothbrushing thing.
Yeah.
That's not practical to not do that. And I'm
Mhm.
not willing to experience the consequences of not doing that
Mhm.
at this stage. So those are really silly things
Yeah.
that show up with my kids. Other things are just giving myself permission. Recently, this is a funny
Mhm.
story. I'm outing myself, but I had an interaction on the soccer field. One of my sons plays soccer, and he's really competitive. And a woman on the sidelines yelled at him, and
Wow.
something in me went, "Oh, excuse me." And I was like,
Mhm.
"Please don't yell at my son." And then she turned around and she just kept talking, like kept
Wow.
going. And so I said, I guess we're going to agree to disagree. Just don't talk to please don't yell at my son.
Mhm.
And we'll agree to disagree. And she couldn't stop talking.
Wow.
And I put my hands on my ears.
Mhm.
I closed my eyes and took a really deep breath and walked away.
Mhm.
And I felt so much shame.
Yeah.
I felt so much shame. So,
Mhm.
how many people just saw me act like a child in a
Mm.
public space by putting my hands on my ears and
Mhm.
taking a deep breath and walking off? I didn't storm, it wasn't all that dramatic. And I
Yeah.
actually worked this out with my therapist
Mhm.
and found out that I actually love how I showed up.
Yeah.
I actually had zero shame. My
Yeah.
shame was a result of external pressure to
Mhm.
perform and look a certain way
Yeah.
and be the one in control of my body and be the one in control of my words. And that's a really funny example, but
Mhm.
it was my shame had nothing to do. I actually was
Yep.
just fine with how I showed up. So
That's great.
it's kind of simple, right? It's
Mhm.
not, it can look like choosing not to go to college
Yep.
because I want to study something else,
Mm.
or it can be a larger decision. But I
Yeah.
think what's important for your listeners and maybe some of us who we can't make those larger decisions and trust ourselves to make those larger decisions if we aren't making these day in and day out
Mhm.
decisions for ourselves, these
Yeah.
little things, and adjusting,
Mhm.
changing our mind. It's also okay to change our mind.
Mhm. That's great. I love that. I think for me, something that's really important is the idea of self trust. Again, this
Hmm.
is so much of what we get to share with others comes out of our own story of
Yeah.
relearning our own stories. And so for me, um, this idea that I can trust myself and that the decisions that I
Yeah.
make are good and that God trusts me and that I have good people around me, that if I get stuck, I'm not alone, has been really important. And I think, starting really small, I think is important because so much of our life, like so much of the pain that we experience are in those small micro moments. Like,
Hmm.
yes, we all have like deep painful moments of I have this big capital T trauma, but so much of it is just the complexities of just the little moments of breaking and disconnection that happen throughout our day. And so
Hmm.
even as you're sharing, I'm like, okay, so processing what's happened for me, I was in a really good walking routine where that felt really good. And then my body flared a little bit, which is some health issues. And I was like, nope, this does not feel good. My body does not want to
Right.
move. And right, diet culture says, oh, nope, right? Like no rest days, gotta work, you gotta stay on your routine. If you stop your routine, you're never gonna walk ever again. And it's like, okay, I'm taking off 4 or 5 days. My body's going to be okay. My body is
Yeah.
asking me to go slow.
Yes.
And even things like the dishwasher the other night, I was like, nope, I do not have it in me to unload that right now. The other dishes can stay in the sink and they will be okay. And tomorrow morning, once I've had a good night's sleep, everything will get put away as it needs to, right? Um, but so much of our social conditioning is, you just have to push through.
Yes. Or when
And
I finish this, I'll be able to rest.
mm-hmm,
Like you could have told your body, when we reach this goal for
mm-hmm,
health, or
yep,
when I have this, then you can rest. Let's just go for a short walk, then you can rest,
mm-hmm,
rather than engaging the rest as part of your healing.
yeah. And right, the other side of me, the unhealed version of Bridget, even as we're talking, I'm like, but people are going to just use that to be lazy, right? There's this thing that pops up in me of like,
Yeah.
and I think that's the hard part of even leaning into a narrative of self-trust and believing that the way that God designed our bodies is good and that he trusts us and that we are trustworthy in our own bodies is so against what we were taught. That even inside of me, right, the I feel this fight right now as we're
Yeah.
talking to be like, I just want rules. Because if we follow the rules, they're going to stay safe. Or
Hmm.
like, well, what if someone makes the wrong choice? Or what if someone, all these things kind of spin. But I'm like, no, the only way that we give people a real access to freedom is giving people the opportunity to mess it up. And we're going to, right? We're
Reframing messing up too.
yes.
Right? Like reframing messing up as like, because we can't actually, I've actually changed my view on this. Like
Oh, cool.
I can't miss it,
Yeah.
because God's purpose, God's call, God's plan, who
Mm-hmm.
I am is inside of me.
Yeah.
So I'm taking it everywhere I go. So
Mm-hmm.
even if what your body in that moment
Yeah.
needed wasn't to take 4 or 5 days off, let's
Mm-hmm.
just say
Yeah.
that wasn't
I love
actually
this.
what
This is great.
your
Mm-hmm.
body was communicating to you. But
Mm-hmm.
you chose, because
Mm-hmm.
you felt sensation,
Mm-hmm.
you noticed and you responded. You engaged the sensation and you said, "Oh, my body needs something. I'm going to give it rest."
Mm-hmm.
You just built trust. That's the thing. It's not
Yeah.
logic and reason, so there's not right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You engaged the sensation, you responded to the sensation, and you acted. And so now your body is like, "Okay, Bridget listens to me. I
Yeah.
don't have to scream as loudly as I used
Mm-hmm.
to get her to pay attention. I don't have to have, because we treat, especially pain,
Yeah.
we treat emotions as problems to fix too. We
Mm-hmm.
treat these things like, I'm going to solve this for you. I have this pain.
Yeah.
How can I fix it? I'm going to take ibuprofen and mask
Mm-hmm.
the symptoms. I'm going to take a bath. I recently had a chronic shoulder thing, and
Wow.
I do this work, Bridget.
Mm-hmm.
And for weeks, I'm going to the chiropractor and I'm doing light stretches and I'm resting it. And I never actually had to take painkillers, but if I'd had to engage in something that required me the use of this arm, if my
Yeah.
life, I would have had to take painkillers to
Yeah.
get through. And I was doing all of these things to
Mm-hmm.
treat the symptom. And then I was sitting there. I do this thing where I put my legs up the wall, because when the
Mm-hmm.
blood flows down from your legs, it comes back to your brain and it tells your body that a tiger's not chasing you.
Okay.
It works. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk more about it. But I
Mm-hmm.
was laying there just doing my normal breathing exercises, and I felt the sensation, and I just instinctively put my hand there and
Mm-hmm.
started naming the sensation. It's this dull ache, and sometimes there's a sharp pinch feeling, and
Mm-hmm.
it hurts more when I move this, and it started to subside, and I was
Yeah.
thinking it. Oh, right. Why didn't I think of this earlier? And so it was this
Mm-hmm.
moment of every time I put attention, the pain subsided. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I started thinking about something else, or I started doing something else, the pain came back.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I put attention, and it was this, I didn't get rid of the pain right
Mm-hmm.
then and there. I don't actually know why my shoulder hurt. I
Yeah.
still don't. Initially, it kind of went away, but I could feel the memory of it. So
Mhm.
I was still in tune with the
Yeah.
sensation, even though it didn't hurt. Um, and I'm not saying that all pain, because sometimes when we tune into sensation, it gets loud.
Mhm.
It can get almost unbearable.
Yeah.
So we sometimes have to do it in slow increments. It's okay to go slow. It's okay to just tune in for 30 seconds.
Mhm.
But knowing that our pain, treating our pain as information
Mhm.
rather than a problem to fix
Mhm.
is where I was going with that. And if we
Yeah.
just treat it as information and we just respond to it in the best way we know how, we're building trust with ourselves for
Yeah.
future. Maybe you'll respond to the same or similar pain in your body differently
Mhm.
if you ever experience it again. And that will be the quote unquote right thing for you in that moment as well.
Mhm. So, question, um, when, um so it goes back to my the freak out part of Bridget that wants rules, right? Um
Yes.
Because I know the journey in my own life. Like at some point, we've all used unhealthy coping mechanisms or problematic behavior to try to satiate pain. And we've learned, oh, hey, when I behave in this activity or when I um, live like this, it causes more pain. So part of it is navigating this journey of, hey, I've listened to sensations before and I've um, and ended up in behaviors or patterns that haven't been helpful. So, kind of what does that look like in kind of that reestablishing safety of, hey, I can choose to do something different when I'm acknowledging this. Like, so, maybe when I felt a lot of loneliness, my typical response is numbing out on social media. Right. So I'm noticing the sensation and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go do something with it, but I'm picking a solution that may not um, contribute to the type of health I want to live in my life.
Yeah.
How do I make that shift to actually, when I'm noticing a pain, a heartache in the loneliness, and I want to make a healthier choice? How do we make that shift as we pay attention to what's happening in our bodies?
Couple things. I To make the shift, I think the first thing we need to do, not we have to, but
Hmm.
I feel like it's more effective if we take the
Hmm.
judgment out of it.
Yeah.
So they're coping strategies, right?
Hmm.
They're coping mechanisms, and maybe they're higher level. I was seeing a coach for a while that called them higher level coping
Yeah.
strategies. And so people are trading this numbing out behavior, scrolling social media, if you will, or drinking or
Hmm.
something else, and they're trading it for working out
Hmm.
or yoga or meditation, but it's still a
Mm.
coping strategy.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying, I think, is like so important. That first step of noticing that, hey, when I feel whatever it is, in this case, loneliness,
Hmm.
my instinct is to numb out with social media.
Mm.
And even if you do that in that
Hmm.
moment and you
Yeah.
choose to numb out, you're you're still building something in you because now you
Yep.
noticed this
Yep.
is what I default to. And it's not, I think we can't beat ourselves into submission.
Yep.
I've heard people say like you can't shame your way into change.
Hmm.
So you can't force your body, but a lot of that looks like I place a lot of emphasis on our bodies, but I'm
Hmm.
not elevating our body again ahead of our minds or our spirits or any
Yeah.
of those things. The body, something that I say a lot that is real, but our thoughts aren't always true.
Hmm.
Feelings aren't fact, but the body doesn't lie.
Hmm.
And it doesn't mean that because of my past trauma, I'm not misinterpreting something.
Hmm.
I view, until I heal certain stories, I
Yep.
used to view groups of women as dangerous
Hmm.
because of my own unhealed story. So one
Yep.
on one, it was fine, but groups, particularly trios of women, were a
Wow.
threat to me. And
Hmm.
it wasn't safe. And I just avoided that all the time. And it didn't take just noticing that. It actually took healing a story I didn't even know was connected and then recognizing years later like, "Oh wait, I have lots of trio friends. Like what
Hmm.
is this?" And recognizing that and healing my past story. I actually healed my present and my future stories
Yep.
because the meaning I had assigned to something that had happened had created this danger. So my body
Hmm.
responded in danger
Yeah.
and I retreated. And it wasn't wrong. it was keeping me safe. But when we heal our stories of pain, things that maybe were dangerous before,
Mhm.
loneliness might feel you, sorry if I don't
No,
mean to
you're
pick
great.
on
Go
this
for it.
moment, but loneliness might feel like it's a danger, and that's why
Mhm.
you numb out, because loneliness isn't safe.
Yeah.
And so part of the healing, if you will, is maybe there's a story of loneliness
Mm.
when loneliness wasn't safe, that
Yeah.
as you engage that feeling of loneliness, so maybe the next time you don't engage social media, you actually tune into your body's
Mhm.
sensations. Since we're here, like, where do I feel loneliness in my body?
Yep.
And just be with that place. If it's in my throat, just
Mhm.
placing your hands. And something I do that's really simple that your listeners could easily do. And this,
Mhm.
I feel loneliness. You don't have to be able to name it. Sometimes I don't know what I feel, and I don't know is a
Mm.
thing, and I find I don't know in my body. But I feel loneliness in my throat, and I put my hands there and I breathe in, I feel lonely. And then
Mhm.
I exhale, it's okay to feel lonely.
Mhm.
And that's all I do. And maybe I only do it for 30 seconds.
Mhm.
Maybe I only do it 3 times. It
Yeah.
doesn't, you don't have to stay with it until you get some sort of resolution or until the sensation shifts.
Yeah.
It's just, that's what's beautiful and so simple about connecting to our bodies, is it's a lot of just noticing and engaging and
Mhm.
being with,
Yeah.
accepting what is, rather than shifting to what I want it to be.
Yep. Beautiful. Love it. Well, I want to connect people to you in a moment, but before we kind of jump to resources, as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, or do you have any last minute thoughts? Or, we've talked about that the breath of putting your hand on your body where
Hmm.
you're feeling, and again, even that is intuitive, right? It's not
Yeah.
logical. Of why do I feel sadness in my arm or my knee? Like there might not be a logical answer for it. It's
No.
just that's what's happening in my body. What is one simple practice that our listeners can take home to say, okay, today this is something I can do to actually start noticing my body?
Hmm. Oh, there's so many simple things, but because of where we went in this conversation, what I would say is, when you notice that
Mm-hmm.
you feel something, anything,
Mm-hmm.
just stopping for, even if it's a split second, stopping long enough to notice
Mm-hmm.
rather than push through. Or like when
Yeah.
tears come inexplicably,
Yep.
staying with the tears a half second longer, because
Yep.
I've been practicing this for years and my tears still go away when I want them to stay, because I'm trying so hard to let them move through. Or when
Mm-hmm.
you laugh, when something delights your soul,
Mm-hmm.
staying with laughter just a half second longer.
Mm-hmm.
Or smiling at the little girl that's playing with her ducky, her stuffed ducky in the
Mm-hmm.
pond, and you're giggling because that thing is now disgusting, and but you're delighting in it.
Yeah.
Stare at her just 2 seconds longer
Mm-hmm.
and allow yourself to feel
Mm-hmm.
the sweetness of the moment. That, all of that is engaging sensation. All
Mm-hmm.
of those are sensations. And that would, I would say that's one of the more meaningful. There's breath work, there's vagal
Yeah.
tone, there's all of those things you can do, but just connecting internally is
Mm-hmm.
one of the most healing and regulating
Yeah.
things we can do.
Beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
sadness, I wish we had hours and hours to talk. Have so enjoyed this conversation. We acknowledge that we weren't able to touch all the things on this topic, but just an introduction to what would it look like. I always like to use the phrase of compassionate curiosity, is what would it look like, and even just allowing yourself to answer that question, what would it look like today if um, even replacing judgment, right? Even as we're talking, I'm being
Yeah.
vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm feeling that voice of judgment rise up in me. What does it look like to engage in compassionate curiosity towards what's happening um, in your experience? But if people want to get connected with you, if they want to follow along on your journey or work with you, how do they do that?
The best way, I don't have a website, I have a landing page, but the
Okay,
best way
great.
is Instagram. I'm
Okay.
most accessible on Instagram. There's, the link in bio thing, but I
Hmm.
post about a lot of this. I do little short somatic exercises with people, and that's the best way to sort of familiarize yourself
Hmm.
with the work. And then there, you can of course always book a session. I do one-on-one sessions, I do in-person and remote workshops and
Great.
retreats. And so as things pop up, if you stay in touch, maybe I'll see some of you. live
Awesome.
in person.
Yay. Well, Wendy, I so appreciate you taking the time today to hang out with our listeners. And we'll definitely have you back in our Recover Your Life family again.
Yes, it's been a privilege. Thanks so much, Bridget.